Now let's turn to the Jews of Spain under the Romans. Christianity grew in the Roman Empire. The numbers of Christians increased. And because of their increase in number, there was confusion in the Roman Empire on a large scale. Romans who were trying to control the empire were not aware of the fact that the troubles were because so much of the population didn't feel loyal to the authorities. So what you have in Rome is a series of conflicts going on to the point where between the year 200 and 300, in 100 years, there were 60 Roman emperors. That's not much of a tenure.
Turbulence.
Yeah, real turbulence. I mean, one case is interesting. This was earlier than that, but in the year 69, Nero died, and Galba marched at the head of his army and declared himself emperor, and then 3 months later, Otto came into Rome at the head of his army and declared himself emperor. And then 2 months later, Vitellius came in, and he became emperor. And then Vespasian, who was in Israel at the time, his army said, no, you're the emperor of Rome. And so he sailed back to Rome, and he took over. So in the year 69, there were 4 emperors of Rome. But once Vespasian took control, he stayed there, and then he established his dynasty. But later on, between 200 and 300, you had this complete confusion until Constantine was elected, and he said, the problem is that we have too many people who are not loyal to Rome. Let's do something about it. Now, things had happened in the Roman Empire. First of all, and this is so important for an understanding of any part of the history of the Western world. At the beginning, we know from attitudes, the Christians were a closed community. Each city had its Christian community. First they were attached to the Jews, and then they separated from the Jews, established their own communities, their own churches. They shifted their Sabbath day from the seventh day to Sunday. They made other changes to separate themselves from the Jews. And this went on for a long time because there were Christians who were Christians and still wanted to do Jewish things. They felt that they should. It says in the Bible, you have to reserve Passover on the 14th day of the month of Nisan. And Christians used to celebrate Passover on Pesach. And then there were certain church leaders like St. John Chrysostom who used to rail and rant against that, and he used to curse them and force them not to celebrate Easter on Passover, and shift it down to a different day. And certain things are going on. You could see that many Christians felt that they are Christians, so they should be Jewish in certain ways, like observe the Sabbath and eat kosher food. But there were others who were constantly propagating against it, and finally they made the break, but it took several centuries. In the meantime, the communities had grown, and as the communities grew, the people who led the communities became men of power. The word bishop is interesting. It comes from the Greek word episkopos, which means episcopal, which means a supervisor. And the original supervisor of a community was simply the one person chosen to do business with the unbelieving world, those infidels. I mean, we don't want to deal with them, but they'll choose someone to do it. So the original heads of the Christian communities were people who had to manage the affairs with the outside world. But gradually they became the organizers and the rulers and the people who controlled the money that was being collected, and they became men with power. And once they had power, of course, they had that other factor which comes with power, and that is corruption. So the Emperor Constantine said, I can talk to these leaders of the Christian communities because these are men I can do business with. And so he called together the bishops of the Christian communities and asked them what they wanted. Anyway, he was convinced that the Romans should now recognize Christianity as a legal religion. And so in the year 312, he published the Edict of Milan in 312. He was in the city of Milan in Italy. He published a decree saying Christianity is now a legitimate religion to be recognized by the state.